In this video, we are going to look at inheritance. Inheritance is a nice advantage to object-oriented programming. It is the ability to inherit code from another class, and they refer to this as extending the other class or the parent class. So you will see documentation talk about a parent class as having a child class, and the child class inherits code from the parent class. Occasionally you'll also come across other terms that mean the same thing. A derived class inherits from the base class, or the subclass inherits from the superclass. Now, child, derive, and sub all mean the same thing. Parent, base, and super all mean the same thing. And you may even hear people say the child class and the base class, or the child class and the superclass. But even if they kind of mix and match here, parent, base, and super are all the same thing. They're the one that the code exists in previously, and child, derived, and sub all get the code by inheritance. Here's an example. Let's say I create an employee class, and I inherit from our original person class. Now, this means that the employee class automatically gains all the code from the person class without me having to copy and paste. Think of it this way. If I had this person class all set to go, and I wanted to make another class called employee, I think I forgot to define. Oh, what have I missed? Class, person, object. Yeah, no define. Silly. Okay. So what I could do is I could take all of this code that was in the person class, because employees are people too. I could copy that code and then paste it down here. And then after that, add on new stuff. So employee data. And then, let's see, employees have first names and they have last names, but they also have things like an ID value, employee ID. So I'd add in something for like the employee ID. And then of course I'd need to have a property for the employee ID. So I'd make a little room, I put the property there, and I'd have to modify the method so that it returned the ID as well as the first name, and so on. So I could do that, but it's not the most efficient way. For one thing, I've got 2 copies of the code I need to maintain over time. If ever I change the code, for whatever reason, in the person class, I need to actually search down the code in the employee class and make the same changes. And that could just be cumbersome. So yes, I could do all that, but there's a much better way to reuse code from one class into another, and that's through inheritance. So instead of inheriting from the basic object class, you inherit from your person class. And when you do, you automatically get all the features that came with the person class. Let's see. I'll just put none in there as a basic placeholder for right now. So now if I go through and I say obj p e1, I guess, for an employee one, equals a employee object, I can go ahead and set the first name to, I don't know, Joe. Oops, let's print it out. And you can see that the toString method actually already exists in there. When I run it, Joe prints out because all the same code that was in person is now in employee, even though you didn't type it out. It's as if you invisibly typed it out. Well, it's as if you inherited all that code, and that's what inheritance is. Now, of course, you probably don't want to just inherit. You want to extend it. You want to add on your own code. So what I would do would be I would inherit from the person class, and then I'd tell it that this class is for employee data, change my description, etc. And in the constructor, I'd add on additional features. So for example, I'd add on the ID. And I'd add on a getter and setter. I'd modify the toString method so that it included the ID as well as the data from the original toString method that came from the parent class, or as they say here, the super class. And by doing that, I've overridden the original toString method in the person class, extracted its data, and then just added on my own feature. Now, it's true that there's a lot of code here, but it's already a lot less code than if I'd copied and pasted all the code in person and then try to add on. And think of it this way. What if we had another layer? What if we had a temporary employee class? The temporary employee class would inherit from employee. It would get the code from person and employee, and then I just add on anything like, let's see, temporary employees have an end date, so I'd add on like an end date. This makes it really easy to make very complex code. Also, persons can be applied to both customers and employees or any other type of person. So I can make a basic set of code that applies to people in general, and then more specific sets of code for my child class or derived class or subclass, whatever you want to call it. A specific set of code that is based on person, and just add in the new features such as a customer ID or employee ID, such as I'm doing here. With this technique, you can start writing very complex pieces of code by extending a basic class into a derived class, or parent class into a child class. As you start getting into much more complex applications, it becomes extremely important to do so. When I call the employee class, I only defined ID as a property. I set the ID. But again, first name is inherited, so I can still set that. And when I call toString, it'll go ahead and print out both the ID and name because I included that in my I called the original base class to extract out the first name, or super class as it's called, and then added on the ID and print it out. Best way to see this is to actually create your own. So that's what you're going to do next, and I will see you in that lab.